My name is Sidney Shirley, and today's presentation is going to be about addiction. Just kind of an overview of what we're going to be talking about today. We're going to go over what addiction is, how it affects the brain, and how addiction functions. What we're going to be talking about today is what addiction is, how addiction functions and affects the brain, the cycle of addiction, or the cycles that you can use for addiction and the process for that, some statistics locally and globally, and some resources that can be used here locally in Burke County and just kind of worldwide. First, what is addiction? Scientific research has shown us that addiction is a medical disorder that affects the brain and changes behavior. Addiction is a result of biological and environmental factors working together to evolve into a potentially life-threatening disease. This disease is considered a chronic relapsing disorder and is often characterized by behaviors such as compulsive drug seeking and use in spite of negative or harmful consequences. Substance use disorders result from changes in the brain that occur with repeated use of alcohol or drugs. Addiction is a state of psychological or physical dependence, or both, on the use of alcohol or other drugs. The term addiction is commonly used in such a vague way that there's been many attempts to define it more clearly, which is why I'm not going to give you one of those many specific definitions. We're going to kind of generally define it, and you can take that and define it as you wish. The term addiction is often used as an equivalent term for substance dependence and is sometimes also applied to behavioral disorders such as sexual, internet, and gambling addictions, just to name a few. The four C's of addiction is, I think, a good way to help determine how you want to define addiction and help with determining the cycle of addiction. The four C's are craving, loss of control of amount or frequency use, compulsion to use, and use despite consequences. So craving, control, compulse, and consequences are your four C's for that. Addiction is about the way your body and mind craves a substance or behavior, especially if it causes a compulsive or obsessive pursuit of what you would classify as a reward and lack of concern over any consequences those may have. Next, we're going to talk about how addiction affects the brain. Drug use affects many parts of the brain, including the prefrontal cortex, the amygdala, and the basal ganglia. Now we're going to define those so we know what those are. The prefrontal cortex is in charge of executive functions like planning, problem solving, self-control, and decision making. It's a very important part. The amygdala is in charge of processing emotions, and the basal ganglia is the motivator of our pleasure seeking for things like eating and sex. Drug use can cause these parts of the brain and other parts to go into overdrive. The brain begins to lose interest in everything but the drug for pleasure and relief, therefore initiating a compulsion to seek out and use said substance. This happens because addictive substances trigger an outsized response when they reach the brain. Instead of a simple, pleasurable surge of dopamine, many drugs of abuse, such as opioids, cocaine, or nicotine, cause the dopamine to flood the reward pathways in your brain, which causes 10 times more of a dopamine reaction in your brain than just a natural reward. So if you get a dopamine surge of just a simple pleasure, something you enjoy doing regularly, when you use one of the addictive substances, any listed or ones not listed, those cause that reward pathway to be flooded 10 times more than what would actually happen, which is what starts that addiction process of you enjoying that reward so much. The brain, in turn, remembers this surge, the surge of dopamine that we were talking about, and associates it with the substance. However, over time, with chronic use, if the substance the brain circuits adapts and becomes less sensitive to dopamine. Therefore, achieving that pleasurable sensation becomes increasingly important. So, once your brain remembers the surge of dopamine and associates it to whatever you're doing or using, and you use that constantly, chronically, and repeatedly over time, the circuits in your brain start to adapt and they become less sensitive to that particular amount of use. And so, therefore, you build up a tolerance. And with a tolerance you'll end up needing more and more of that substance to generate that level of high you crave. Therefore, you'll need to start using more or doing more to create, because you build up that tolerance, therefore creating more of an addiction, using more and more of that substance. These are just some problems that addiction can cause. There's many more, but these are some of them. Addiction can cause problems with your focus on everyday activities. It can cause problems with your memory, whether it's keeping memories, making them, or anything of that nature. Learning, decision making, and judgment. It creates a weakened immune system within your body. Creates an array of heart conditions that there's too many to put down here, but just an array of heart conditions. Brain damage, strokes, seizures, depending on the type of substance you're using. Liver and lung damage, especially if you're using like a nicotine product. And I'm sure, as most of us know, it can also cause death. Those are just some. Before we get on to the cycle, when someone develops an addiction, the brain craves a reward of the substance, and this is due to the intense stimulation of the brain's reward system. This is what we were talking about, that is 10 times increased with that dopamine use. And the brain responds to addiction based off a number of factors, such as the type of drug you're using, the number of drugs used at a time, the frequency of use, and the stage of addiction that has developed, which is what we're going to talk about here in the cycle. The multiple stages of addiction can occur over a short period of time, or they can take months or even years to develop. The stages of addiction, we're going to go through each of them individually, is initial use, abuse, tolerance, dependence, addiction, and relapse. And those are the stages listed. We're going to go more in depth into those because of course there's more to that than just those. The first stage we're going to go over is initial use. It can be seemingly benign as getting a prescription to manage pain or mental health issue, or as culturally typical as trying a first drink when you get old enough at 21, or as insidious as being pressured by friends or family to trying illicit drugs. That is one way you can classify initial use. Another way of classifying initial use is it kind of like a process, and that is what's down here at the bottom. It's initial use, so the very first time you use it, whether it's any of these ways listed above, then you start experimentation, which is experimenting with the drug and the different doses and types. Then that turns into social use, using it out, more people, more of its social situations, then habitual use, all the time. A number of risk factors that can lead to a person to have a higher risk of developing addiction are family history of substance abuse or other mental health disorders, abuse or neglect, chaotic living environment, peer group or family that is permissive about substance use, so they're just kind of okay, or they don't really care that you use or what you use, and depression, social issues, loneliness, any sort of mental health that figures into that. And stage 2 is abuse. This is the point at which the person using the substance is using the substance on a recurring improper basis. So you're not using what you're supposed to be using when you're supposed to be using it. And with legal substances such as tobacco or alcohol or prescription medications obtained from a doctor, abuse is a little harder to define, but it is often defined as the point where the person is using the substance for the euphoric response, the high it creates, rather than for the social or treatment aspect of the substance. And stage 3 we move on to is tolerance. Tolerance, first we're going to define it. And tolerance is a condition described as one in which the original dosage or use of the substance no longer produces the same physical or mental effect. So we've kind of already covered that a little bit, that the longer you use or the more chronically you use something, you're going to build up that tolerance. And that's where it just doesn't have the same effect physically or mentally that it's had on you like the first time. When a person has been using a prescription drug or abusing other substances over a long period of time, the substance can cause a change in the brain that results in this tolerance that we've defined. And as a result, the person using the substance may increase the dosage or frequency of use to try to recapture the original result. Stage 4. Stage 4 is just simply defined as, at a certain point, the body or brain becomes dependent on having the substance to be able to function properly. Just in a sense meaning that just at a certain point within this process of getting to addiction, your body and your brain tells you that you need the substance, that you depend on it to function properly as a human being daily. And stage 5 is addiction. Addiction, as we've talked about, is a specific chronic mental health disorder that results in defined symptoms and behaviors that can be used to diagnose the condition. According to the DSM-5, the 11 signs and symptoms of substance use disorders, like addiction, are as following. Using more of the substance than the person originally planned, like if you're taking a prescription medication. And the next one is being unable to stop using the substance. Experiencing relationship problems based on substance use. Spending large amounts of time seeking or using the substance or recovering from use of said substance. Reducing participation in favorite activities in favor of use of said substance. Being unable to keep up daily responsibilities due to substance use. Craving the substance. Continuing to use despite the negative health effects. Regularly using the substance in dangerous situations. Developing a tolerance. And experiencing withdrawal symptoms when use is stopped. And those are the 11 symptoms or signs, whichever one you would rather prefer, that the DSM-5 classify as a substance use disorder or addiction. And stage 6 is relapse. A hallmark of any chronic condition is the potential for the person to relapse. And the relapse isn't just always condensed to drug addiction. Relapses can happen in many chronic health conditions or health issues. But as we all know, relapse is a hallmark of any condition of such. And the National Institution of Drug Abuse states that relapse rates for addiction are at 40 to 60%. Sometimes the initial treatment is not quite right, or that person starts by trying to quit without help, and over time control is lost and the person relapses to drug use. However, this is not an indication that the person has failed, only that treatment needs to be adjusted. So it's not the end, is essentially. And next we're moving on to statistics. And these are some statistics I have pulled from the National Center for Drug Abuse in their website, and I believe I have listed them in here under resources, but if not, I will add that in. They have wonderful statistics on there, and this is where I pulled lots of these from. And below are some facts we'll go over and statistics about just how prevalent substance abuse and addiction is today in our society and in our kind of our young adults in today's world. Since 2000, nearly 1 million people have died of drug overdose. As of 2020, over 37 million people ages 12 and older actively use illicit substances. And those are just the ones that have been documented. That is not even the ones that people have no idea about. And 13.5% of Americans 12 years and older have used drugs in the last 30 days. So at any point you're watching this or you read that statistic, 13.5% of all Americans 12 and older have used some sort of drug in the last 30 days. And 25.4% of all users of illicit drugs suffer from drug dependency or addiction. And of the nearly 140 million people 12 and older who drink alcohol, over 20% of them suffer from alcohol abuse or addiction. Drug abuse and addiction cost the U.S. over $700 billion annually in healthcare expenses, crime-related costs, and loss of workplace productivity. So anything that you hear about that goes into people needing help when they get to hospitals, healthcare facilities, in our justice system, and the crimes being committed, and losing those people in our workplace today, it costs our government and our people today over $700 billion annually. And research that the National Center for Drug Abuse Statistics has done shows that about 50% of individuals with a diagnosed mental illness will also struggle with substance abuse at some point in their lives, and vice versa, meaning that at least half of people that have a substance abuse will also suffer from a mental illness at some point in their lives. So essentially, it's very important to have this knowledge and this research, because for about half of the people struggling with one or the other will come to play in that as well. And in 2017, 1 in every 25 people, which was about 4% under the age of 18, suffered from substance abuse. So out of our youth, 1 in every 25, about 4% of all of our youth under the age of 18 suffered from a substance abuse in 2017. And about 46% of teenagers have used a drug for the first time by the time they reach the 12th grade. So by the time your child or your grandchild or your student that you have, by the time they graduate high school, almost half of them have tried a drug or illicit substance for the first time by the time. And these are just the most updated statistics that I have found on this website. These are just as of 2020, so more recent statistics have not been published yet, but this is just as of then. We are at least certain that we're for sure they're higher nowadays, at least especially in our youth. Next, I just want to go over some resources with you guys that locally here in Burke County you can use, or just kind of worldwide if you're not locally or you don't want to reach out locally. The SAMHSA National Helpline, and I have included the link in that. The findtreatment.samhsa.gov, or there's a phone number you can call, which is the 1-800-662-HELP. There's also the drug-free workplace, and there's that number beside it. It's 1-800-WORKPLACE, for if you are in some sort of company, or like so anywhere you work at a workplace, and maybe you or somebody you know within your workplace is using or abusing and in the process of addiction. This is a number you can call to maybe get some information or some help started for that person. And the next resource is not particularly something you can, or someone you can reach out to, but it's something that is very vital in helping fight the addiction processes that we're fighting today, and that is Narcan or naloxone. And you can get that from many community outreach places, and like here in Burke County you can use Burke Recovery or BSAN, or you can also use Alpha, and they offer it, like say someone goes into like an overdose and the police are called, the ambulances will distribute those to the person who has overdosed and such things like that. But also usually lots of people and personal, like have them in their personal items for things such as that happening. And a website you can go to, I went on all of these websites that I've listed, and it's getsmartaboutdrugs.gov. Has a lot of good information. In general, it's really easily understood, so you can just, if you're kind of lost about where to start, it's a great place to start. These are some more locally like hotline and crisis numbers that I've listed. There is the Detox Resources, is the CHS Blue Ridge, that's here in Morganton, and that number is listed. There is the Burke County Crisis number. It's for any crisis at all, especially and including addiction or overdose or any sort of crisis like that. There is the Alcoholics Anonymous hotline and the Narcotics Anonymous hotline, and all of those are listed here. And there is drugfree.org. That one is a very popular website that even before doing all of this research and resources that I've seen many times. There is harmreduction.org, and here locally there is Burke Recovery and BSAN for your resources. And this was just some of the information to help get you started about your knowledge and where to start with your addiction. Thanks.